Philippine Economic Zone Authority is on a strong approvals run, even as the broader investment story has been shaken by corruption scandals. As big, bold reforms are rolled out to restore confidence, PEZA sits at the front line of how locators and foreign investors really judge the Philippines today. With us now for more is the Director General of the Philippine Economic Zone Authority, Tereso Panga. It's good seeing you again, DG Teo. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Ms. Cathy. Thank you for having me in your program. It's a pleasure.
And congratulations on 30 years. That went last month, and with some numbers to boot in terms of exports, quality jobs, as well as investments.
Yes, we just celebrated our 30th year anniversary, and so we feel that we have become more relevant and vibrant as we attract more investments into the country. And so with our 30-year history in PEZA, we can provide for the blueprint as we can provide for the best location and business ecosystem for our investors.
Well, that run of a streak in approvals has continued for all of 2025. We've seen a record number of approvals, but when you take a look at the collapse in foreign direct investments, that's where the concern comes in, because there's a bit of a gap between, a huge gap in fact, between the approvals and the actual investments. Why do you think that is?
Well, the type of investments that we cater to in PEZA are what we call administrative byproduct. So usually there is a gestation period when these investments are translated into projects. But there's a high probability of these projects being translated into realized investments. And so we continue to attract investments because the investors that we cater to in PEZA are investing in the future rather than the present. And I think it speaks volumes of the trust and confidence that they have in the Philippines and in PEZA in general.
But it also speaks about governance and the way they see risks in terms of how the government handles it. That gestation period, has that become a longer sort of a timeline because of the concern, the ongoing concern on the flood control scandal?
Well, it's a cause for concern. I think all these political risks and all this noise about corruption in government is definitely impacting on our viability as an investment destination. But the upside is we haven't seen that impact yet. In terms of gestation period, usually when investors apply with us for projects, they have to show proof already of their lease contract or proof of ownership over land and building. And so it makes sense for them to immediately start out with their project. So usually the gestation period would range from 2 to 4 months for those occupying already existing buildings and up to 2 years for really greenfield investments, so that those that will put up new buildings for their projects.
So which ones are maturing, those nearing 4 months, and when will that show up as actual investments? Well, and jobs?
Yes. So consistently, the top 3 sectors that we have in PEZA are those into manufacturing, which account for 58%, those into ecozone development, 29%, and 11% by IT BPM sector. And as soon as they sign their registration agreement with PEZA, usually we give them within 30 days. And they do sign their registration agreement because in most cases, they're ready to deploy their project. They're ready to start with commercial operations, and despite all this political risk happening.
Despite all these political risks happening, but for sure they've had more questions than usual. I mean, what sort of conversations did you go into these existing locators and the would-be locators since the scandal broke out?
Well, yes. Usually they ask us about our ability, our capacity to support and grow their investments, particularly how we can protect their investments. But you know, our selling point to them, what we usually tell them is that in PEZA, at least in the economic zones, they can be in a safer haven for their investments. We've gone through this in our 30-year history of PEZA, and so far, particularly when we assumed into office, when we were appointed, we have had a strong growth trajectory of investments and increasing that consistently. And so we will see the same trend. In fact, from our 262 billion in investments, we're already projecting a 300 billion target in investments for next year. And we don't see any signs of slowing down as long as government can immediately resolve all these issues. so that finally we can tell the global community that we are open for business and that we are ready to welcome their investments into the Philippines.
There's a big caveat there, as long as the government resolves these issues. So what's holding them back?
Well, we can see from the pronouncements of the President, from the Cabinet, that they're well-meaning with their resolve to finally put an issue closure to this. And only when we can hold people, those really responsible for this mess to be accountable for their actions, can we show the Filipino people and the global community that we mean well when we say that we will put an end to this corruption, and that more importantly, we can put in the safety nets, all these reforms, so that finally we can have a corruption-free government in
So
the
that's
Philippines.
what you're getting from the locators.
Yes.
They want to see a resolution. Is it the existing ones or the new ones, the prospective locators?
They're more particular about the flood control projects, but anything that has to do with improving ease of doing business, anything that has to do with better governance, I think can be a more effective tool in attracting investments more than the fiscal incentives.
Well, let's dive into the big, bold reforms, because that came through from January 16th. And just to look at the 4 initiatives here, they include restoring the CARS program, that's one, visa entry for Chinese visitors for 15 days, the BIR's new digital audit, and a single window platform at customs to cut the trade bottlenecks.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of initial reaction have you had from the locators so far on these initiatives?
Well, these are all obviously bold reforms, and these are all welcome development to our ecozone community of investors. I think foremost is how we can get our acts together in government. We now have this create more law in effect, which allows us to grant the most generous fiscal incentives for investors. But unless we are consistent and harmonized with how we implement the law, then that's the only way we can really grant the fiscal incentives as promised in the law and in our registration agreements with PEZA.
Exactly. It's all in the execution. As you say, it's more than just fiscal incentives. So
Yes.
with these reforms and trying to get that act together, how is PEZA going to help and ensure that, it's a seamless transition from what they see as governance risk to, let's start doing business again with the Philippines?
Well, yes. So as we always say it in PEZA, we cannot do this alone. And so we reach out to our partner agencies. Usually we engage with them through a MOA.
Which ones?
Like the likes of DNR, we have MOA with Bureau of Customs, with the Bureau of Immigration. Those agencies that really deal with us closely in facilitating permits and investments of our investors. And the other way is we're investing a lot in automation. I think we're among the very few in government that have already rolled out cashless and paperless transaction system. And so by engaging with other agencies to do the same, we can really enhance some more our ease of doing business and our facilitation of investments and permits.
In fact, I spoke with Perry Ferrer of PCCI just about 24 hours ago, and more than ease of doing business, it's ease of operating business here in the Philippines. I've also spoken with Diwa Ginigundo. He's the former deputy governor of the Bangko Sentral, and he's also now the principal advisor for Global Source Partners. And I did ask him, would these 4 move the needle? And this is what he had to say. Let's listen in.
I think all of this can move the needle, but just a little bit. Because the problem is about governance, it is about corruption. And that is behind the drop in FDI as well as in terms of domestic investment. So in other words, the issue is not just about ease of doing business, ensuring that policies are in place to avoid corruption.
So how do you convince locators then, the current and prospective, that they can trust the process and they're better off trusting the government here rather than the ASEAN? The neighbors are also providing the same fiscal incentives, the same kind of perks.
Yeah.
What makes us different?
Well, if we look at the bold reforms being presented by government, I would say that these are really very effective reforms. These are new reforms being introduced to our investors. And I would say that this will help us a lot in attracting more investments into the country. I think how we are different from the rest of ASEAN is because in the case of PEZA, we've long been into these eco zones. Actually, not just with PEZA, 30 years in history, but predating us is the EPSA way back in 1969. So we have the blueprint. We know we have what it takes to protect and grow their investments into the country. And so that is our value proposition for our investors. In PEZA, there is only one government in the economic zones, and so it helps a lot in facilitating their investments.
Very quickly, what is it going to mean for jobs? You've mentioned a projected increase in actual investments. What is it going to mean for the workers?
Well, these investments that we attract, once these are realized, this will then translate into generation of the much-needed jobs, especially not just in terms of numbers, but quality jobs. Like, for instance, the two main drivers of growth are our electronics and our IT BPM. And so the strategy of PEZA is if we can create more eco zones in rural and new growth areas, then we can provide for more livelihood, support communities, and especially generate more jobs for our Filipinos.
Can you give a ballpark number?
Well, right now we're 1.8 million in direct jobs. We are projecting 100,000 new jobs this year. The big bulk of that will be coming from IT BPO. I think they doubled the level of jobs being created by our manufacturing sector.
All right, we'll leave it at that on that positive note. Thank you so much, and keep us up to speed with all the investment approvals. Thank you. DG Tereso Panga of PEZA.